Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Today, the President of the United States, the man with the nuclear codes, is angry and emotional and acting, frankly, erratically. And that is not my judgment. It's basically what his own cabinet defenders are saying.
The president was totally annoyed that the Europeans did this, and so you're going to hear back from someone who emotionally cares about America. And why are Europeans picking on Kentucky bourbon
Secretary
or
Lutnick,
Harley-Davidson motorcycles?
Are you saying this is an emotional response?
It's disrespectful. He wants these countries to respect him, and all of this showed you is that Europe and Canada do not respect Donald Trump. You know, if you make him unhappy, he responds unhappy.
I mean, points for honesty. He was totally annoyed. That's the economic rationale. That was Commerce Secretary and Trump whisperer Howard Lutnick explaining how the president is just completely shocked that the trade war he launched out of nowhere for no reason against America's closest allies, Canada and the European Union, is suddenly blowing up in his face and threatening to tank the U.S. economy. You might have seen today stocks continued their impressively downward fall amid fears of higher prices from Trump's tariffs and threats and the air of uncertainty that hangs over everything. The S&P 500 fell below 10%, below its all-time high, raising concerns among investors. A sell-off might be happening soon, although it looks like it's already happening. This NASDAQ is already in that worrying territory. The Dow Jones was on track for its worst week since that string of high-profile bank failures in 2023. Again, all of this is happening not because banks failed or Russia invaded Ukraine or some huge macroeconomic structural thing happened. No, it's happening for literally no reason whatsoever other than Trump picking a fight with our neighbors and our neighbors fighting back. And Trump is big mad about it, throwing out new threats of massive tariffs and annexation of foreign territories in a vicious cycle of escalation. Yesterday, Canada and the EU responded to Trump's tariffs by imposing new taxes on U.S. exports, including on signature American products like whiskey and motorcycles. When Trump heard about that retaliation, he basically lost it, made this totally unhinged social media post in the middle of the night, quote, "The European Union, one of the most hostile and abusive taxing and tariffing authorities in the world, which has formed for the sole purpose of taking advantage of the United States, has just put a nasty 50% tariff on whiskey. If this tariff is not removed immediately, the U.S. will shortly place a 200% tariff on all wine, champagnes, alcoholic products coming out of France and other EU-represented countries. This will be great for the wine and champagne businesses in the U.S." That was at 8 a.m., I should know. Now, the U.S. does not technically have any champagne businesses. We are the biggest market for champagne, many other French wines. Trump is threatening a tax at such a high level, the price of a bottle of wine would essentially double, again, for Americans, right? Americans are going to pay that. Everybody who understands trade understands this is insane. I think even people who don't understand trade understand this is insane. It was a point that even Emma Tucker, the editor of the very right-wing Wall Street Journal, made this morning.
That mood has shifted pretty much since all the tariffs started coming in. I think businesses realises now Trump is serious about this. But the problem they've got is that they're being imposed in a very haphazard way, and that's creating so much instability.
When a company has to pay more for its input, will they typically pass it on to the consumer, do you think?
I think eventually they're going to have to.
Yeah.
No, they eat it. An hour later, Trump posted again, I think he was watching, "The globalist Wall Street Journal has no idea what they are doing or saying. They are owned by the polluted thinking of the European Union, which was formed for the primary purpose of screwing the United States of America." I have to say this because we keep saying it. This is a theory of the EU's formation that is just like a thing, as far as I can tell, Trump invented 3 days ago.
Thousands of people fired by Donald Trump are getting their jobs back today because of the first round of proverbial fireworks that went off in a California federal courthouse. And I just got the transcript of what happened there. Trying all day to get it. Finally got it. I really want to share this with you. All right, so let me set the scene. Trump administration has sent a lawyer to defend them in this case in federal court in Northern California. But they are refusing to send any officials from the Trump administration to testify in this case, to explain what they have done and to be questioned about it. the basis of this case is that the Trump White House, the Office of Personnel Management and the Trump White House told federal agencies last month, essentially, to fire tens of thousands of people who work for the government, potentially hundreds of thousands of people. And then after the Trump White House, the Office of Personnel Management told the agencies to fire all those people, then all those people got fired. And it really does not seem like that was legal. It has never seemed like that was legal, that the White House would have the authority to make those kinds of mass firings. But again, they won't send anybody to testify about what exactly they did. So this is from the transcript. So the lawyer who is suing the Trump administration says this. Your Honor, quote, what we have before the court is record evidence that conclusively establishes that OPM directed the terminations at issue. We have a very unusual circumstance where the government has not attempted to say that they factually dispute that. They've actually withdrawn the declaration by which they were attempting to dispute that. And there's no record evidence on the other side by which they have disputed this fact. The judge. I tend to agree with you on that. And the government, I believe, has tried to frustrate the judge's ability to get at the truth of what happened here, and then set forth sham declarations to a sham declaration. They withdrew it, then substituted another. That's not the way it works in the U.S. District Court, the judge says. Quote, I'm going to talk to the government about that in a minute. I had expected to have an evidentiary hearing today in which these people would testify. And if they wanted to get your people on the stand, I was going to make that happen too. It would be fair. But instead, we have been frustrated in that. The judge then says to the lawyer for the plaintiffs, quote, I'd like to hear your views on what relief should be issued today. T-O-D-A-Y, today. The lawyer, thank you, Your Honor. We are aligned in wanting that to happen as well. He spelled out T-O-D-A-Y. And so then they have a conversation, the judge and the lawyer for the plaintiffs, the lawyer who's suing the Trump administration on behalf of the fired employees. And they talk about what the fired employees who are suing the Trump administration, what they're seeking from the judge today, the kind of relief they want. They say they want a list of everybody who's been fired. They haven't been able to get that, or even an enumeration from the government of how many people have been fired. They also want people to be reinstated if they have been fired illegally. So they go through all those details. Then it's time for the Trump administration lawyer to make his side of the case. And he starts explaining to the judge that all these fired workers, the only reason they were fired is because nobody wanted them. Nobody told anybody to fire anything. There was no instructions to fire people. These are just unwanted workers. If anybody wanted them back, they surely would have been rehired by now, right? At which point the judge interjects. The judge, quote, well, maybe that's why we need an injunction that tells them to rehire them. You will not bring the people in here to be cross-examined. You are afraid to do so because you know cross-examination would reveal the truth. Trump administration lawyer tries to interject. Respectfully, the judge continues. This is the U.S. District Court. Whenever you submit declarations, those people should be submitted to cross-examination, just like the plaintiff side should be. And we get at the truth of whether your story is actually true. I tend to doubt it. I tend to doubt that you are telling me the truth whenever we hear all the evidence eventually. Why can't you bring your people in to be cross-examined or to be deposed at their convenience? I said 2 hours for Mr. Ezell. Mr. Ezell is the acting head of OPM. I said 2 hours for Mr. Ezell, a deposition at his convenience. And you withdrew his declaration rather than do that? Come on, that's a sham. The judge says, quote, go ahead. It upsets me. I want you to know that. I have been practicing or serving in this court for over 50 years, and I know how we get at the truth. And you're not helping me get at the truth. You're giving me press releases, sham documents. All right, he says, quote, I'm getting mad at you. And I shouldn't. The judge then decided in this hearing today that he wasn't going to wait to give a written ruling. He decided, you know what, I've heard enough. He decided he was going to rule from the bench today. T-O-D-A-Y, today. So he started with this, the judge, quote, on February 13th, 2025, a briefing paper from Human Resources Management at the Forest Service says this, quote, all, that's spelled A-L-L, All federal agencies, including the Department of Agriculture, were notified on February 12th by the Office of Personnel Management to terminate all employees who have not completed their probationary or trial period. That then led to the termination of a lot of people, the judge says. But one in particular I will give as an example. Leandra Bailey was a physical science information specialist in Albuquerque. In September of last year, she'd received a performance review in which she was, quote, fully successful in every category, not just some, but every category. On February 13th, she was terminated using the OPM template letter. Because in addition to directing these terminations, OPM gave a proposed letter, and the letter said, I'm reading from it, Memorandum for Leandra Bailey, February 13th, from the Director of Human Source Management at the U.S. Forest Service. This is just one sentence, quote, the agency finds, based on your performance, that you have not demonstrated that your further employment at the agency would be in the public interest, close quote. And then the judge says, this, despite the fact that her most recent review was fully successful in every category. The judge says, now, how could it be, you might ask, that the agency could find that based on her performance when her performance had been stellar? The reason OPM wanted to put this based on performance was, at least in part, in my judgment, a gimmick. Because the law always allows you to fire somebody for performance. And the judge says this. Now, what I'm about to say is not the legal basis for what I'm going to order today, but I just want to say it. He says, quote, it is a sad day when our government would fire some good employee and say it was based on performance when they know good and well that's a lie. Excellent in all, fully, what was the phrase? I don't want to misstate it. Quote, fully successful in every category, yet they terminate her based on her performance. That should not have been done in our country. It was a sham in order to avoid statutory requirements. It also happens to be that whenever you fire somebody based on performance, then they can't get unemployment insurance. So that makes it even worse, doesn't it? And then it makes it even worse because the next employer is going to say, well, have you ever been terminated based on performance? They're going to have to say yes to thousands of people. It is illustrative of the manipulation that was going on by OPM to try to orchestrate this government-wide termination of probationary employees. Quote, the court finds that OPM did direct all the agencies to terminate probationary employees. The court rejects the government's attempt to use these press releases and to read between the lines to say that the agency heads made their own decision with no direction from OPM. The relief that's going to be granted is as follows. First, the temporary restraining order will be extended. The VA shall immediately offer reinstatement to any and all probationary employees terminated on or about February 13th or 14th. This order finds that all such terminations were directed by defendant OPM and were unlawful because OPM had no authority to do so. Further, the VA shall cease any and all use of the template termination notice provided by OPM and shall immediately advise all probationary employees terminated February 13th and 14th that the notice and termination have been found to be unlawful by the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. The VA shall cease any termination of probationary employees at the direction of OPM. To repeat, this order holds that OPM has no authority whatsoever to direct, order, or require in any way that any agency fire any employee. Now, given the arguments and the facts in this case, namely that defendants have attempted to recast these directives as mere guidance, my order today, quote, further prohibits defendants from giving guidance as to whether any employee should be terminated. Any termination of agencies' employees must be made by the agencies themselves, if made at all, and they must be made in conformity with the Civil Service Reform Act and the Reduction in Force Act and any other constitutional or statutory legal requirement. He says, quote, in 7 calendar days, relief defendant, VA, the VA shall submit a list of all probationary employees terminated on or about February 13th and 14th with an explanation as to each of what has been done to comply with this order. Then the judge says this. Now, this order so far has only mentioned the VA, the Veterans Administration. But the same relief is extended, and I'm not going to repeat it, but I'm extending the same relief to the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, the Department of Treasury. And so it's the VA plus all those other agencies. He says, and this is without prejudice to extending the relief later in further to other agencies. The judge then closes with this. I will try to get out a short memorandum opinion that elaborates on this order, but this is the order, and it counts effective immediately. Please don't say, oh, I'm waiting for the written order. This is the order from the bench. And then the judge then closes with this admonition to the Trump administration lawyer. Quote, if you want to appeal to the Court of Appeals, God bless you. I want you to, because I'm tired of seeing you stonewall on trying to get at the truth. And that is how thousands of people who work in our government, who Donald Trump and his top campaign donor tried to fire, that is how thousands of Americans got their jobs back today. At the VA, at USDA, at the Defense Department, at the Department of Energy, at the Department of Interior, which includes the National Park Service, at the Treasury Department, which of course includes the IRS. The court ruling also means that the Office of Personnel Management, which they've been using as like the central office for all this stuff that DOJ has been doing, right? The Office of Personnel Management at the White House can no longer tell anyone anything about anybody who should be fired for any reason from any part of the U.S. government. This is the order.
Senate Democrats are split over how they will vote on the Republican plan to keep the government funded, though on Elon Musk and Donald Trump's terms. Trump's budget director, and this is key, is already reportedly preparing to ignore the spending appropriated in the bill. Some Democrats have said they will not support the plan, even if it means a government shutdown. But Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer of New York says he will support the vote basically to get the bill in a position to pass and to keep the government open.
For sure, the Republican bill is a terrible option. It is not a clean CR. It is deeply partisan. It doesn't address far too many of this country's needs. But I believe allowing Donald Trump to take even much more power via a government shutdown is a far worse option.
And Senator Chuck Schumer joins me now. Senator, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's just start on this. I think there are a lot of people watching this right now who are confused about this decision, or upset by it. So just spell out, just give me your logic, particularly on this sort of on the one hand, on the other. What is the cost you see to the constitutional order of a shutdown that isn't already being done now?
It's a dramatic cost. Here's why, Chris. Under a shutdown, it is the executive branch, in this case Trump, Musk, DOJ, and Vogt, who's head of the OMB, who we all know are authoritarians, vicious, nasty, who would have sole control over what is funded and what isn't. They get to determine what is a, quote, essential service. And they will just cut to smithereens, far greater than in the CR bill, which is a lousy bill, far greater than that, what could be funded and what couldn't. And there's no recourse. You can't go to court. This is a decision totally in the executive branch. And so it would be devastating. Why is it that Elon Musk and Donald Trump want a government shutdown? So they can take control of the government and do their vicious, horrible things. They could cut half the government. They could tell employees you're not essential and never bring them back, permanently firing them. It's a disaster. And in a few weeks, if there was a shutdown, everyone would be complaining and howling. Why did they eliminate SNAP? Why did they cut so much of Medicaid? But they could do all that on their own. That's the problem. There is no check on them with a shutdown. That's not to say this CR bill is a good bill. It isn't. It didn't have any safeguards in it. But it would be much, much worse to have a shutdown. And my job, Chris, as leader, is to see things a little bit ahead down the road and see how horrible this would be and alert people to it.
So I want to sort of present two arguments on the other side. One of them is that it was quite, and I hear you on this. This is not an easy call. I want to be clear. I mean, I don't think it is, but, you know, the AFG union, which is the largest union representing federal workers, they won a big victory today in federal court about those probationary employees who were fired. They came out against the CR, which really surprised me, right? These are the people that seem to have the most skin in the game on precisely the terms you're enunciating. And they said, the fact that this CR has no protections that will actually be followed means that we can't support it. If the people whose livelihoods are on the line, say you cannot go along with this thing. Why are they wrong?
I understand why they're so upset with the CR, but I disagree with them because the shutdown would be worse for their employees. They could just eliminate huge portions of government workers automatically. They could eliminate programs automatically, which they can't do on the CR. The CR has certain spending, and they can screw around with it, and they will. These guys are sons of guns. They're going to do everything they can to hurt the government. You know what they've talked about. Elon Musk, this billionaire who cares nothing about taking people's Social Security away, this guy says that he wants to cut $2 trillion out of the federal government. A shutdown would allow him to do it. And here's another point, Chris. There's no exit ramp. Anyone who wants the shutdown, I've asked them, well, how do we get out of it? Guess who it's up to get out of it? Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Doge. So it's a it's two bad alternatives. And I respect people who actually don't want it, vote for the CR. It's awful. But with the alternative being a government shutdown, that's even worse. So
here's the other sort of way that I've heard people phrase this, right? Democrats don't control any part of the government.
Right.
So there's not a ton of leverage. The one thing they have leverage is in the Senate, where you need a filibuster-proof majority on a cloture vote. That there's essentially an unconstitutional assault on the government right now. And I think you would agree with that,
there
right?
Is.
An assault on the constitutional
These guys are the worst, and we got to fight them every step of the way. As we say in Brooklyn, Chris, every effing step of the way.
But look, Russ Vought is already telling people, but he's telling people on the floor, we are not even going to listen to this CR. This is a piece of paper that we will impound and rip up the moment it's passed. If that's the case, how is voting for cloture not essentially an imprimatur on the very same assault on the constitutional order?
They're already, even without this CR, they're already doing it.
Right.
Okay? They did it to the Department of Education. But I can tell you, I've been through shutdowns before. It's not that this CR is good. It's not that voting for it is good. It's horrible. But the alternative is worse. And we have to look just a month ahead and see how bad a shutdown would be for all the things we believe in, and how I'd say Trump and Doge and Musk and Vought, they're like drooling with happiness and desire to get a government shutdown. They've said they want it. Why? Not for doing anything good, I'll tell you that. These guys are authoritarians.
Let me just say with this in 1 second. I think the theory of the case for people that don't want Democrats to vote for cloture is that Americans don't quite understand what's being done to their government. It's being done in this sort of haphazard fashion. The stories are sort of getting out. You know, there's this Forest Service worker who got laid off for no reason, and there's this veteran who's got a traumatic brain injury, who's got a clinical trial. But the shutdown would be a way of actually calling the question. And here's what I would just offer. It seems to me that the demand that makes the most sense here, and I'm not a U.S. Senator, is for the Republicans to vote on a rescission package that enunciates the cuts Doge has done, as opposed to allowing an unelected co-president unilaterally eviscerate the American constitutional power of the purse.
Well, the bottom line is the Republican Senate is in total obeisance to Trump. They're not going to oppose him in any way. But if they allow Trump to make the kind of drastic cuts that I greatly fear in a government shutdown, they'll be culpable as well. And make no mistake about it. Make no mistake about it. Ask yourself again the question, why does Musk and Trump and Vought want this? Vought already has plans on how to slash the government, far worse than slashed in the CR. Much worse. Every program, every part of government would be at their disposal, their wicked disposal. So that's the problem here. It's not that the CR is good, it's horrible. All things being equal, we should have opposed it. But the alternative being a shutdown makes things worse. And I believe this, much worse. And I believe this, I wouldn't have done this. I knew I'd get criticized. But I felt obligated for the country, for my Democratic caucus, to the people, to explain how bad a shutdown would be. And if we went into a shutdown and everything bad happened, I had to give people this warning.
I'm going to just keep you for two more questions, if that's okay. One is a sort of question about strategy and dealing what I think you and I and many people watching this agree is essentially an assault on the constitutional order, and that it's this.
Absolutely.
The only thing they understand is meeting conflict with conflict. So if you look at Doug Ford in Ontario, who banged the table and said, "You're going to tariff us, I'm going to tariff you, we're going to put a surcharge on electricity," that the only thing that gets their attention, the only thing that gets them to back down is meeting conflict with conflict. If you meet conflict with essentially managed retreat or strategic non-engagement, then they roll
Chris,
all over you.
We are going to conflict with them on everything. On the tax cuts for the billionaires. They become a plutocracy, an oligarchy. On Medicaid. We have plans to conflict them with all of that. If the shutdown occurred, we wouldn't be able to do that because they would fill up both the Senate and the discussion on whether we should cut this and not cut that, of things that they want to cut. So to have the conflict on the best ground we have, summed up in a sentence, that they're making the middle class pay for tax cuts for billionaires, it's much, much better not to be in the middle of a shutdown, which would divert people from the #1 issue we have against these bastards, these people, which is not only all these cuts, but they're ruining democracy. And one other thing on a shutdown. On a shutdown, the courts could close or at least be totally disabled. And the courts are one of the best ways we've had to go after these guys.
Final question about just an issue of intercameral strategy. I mean, the Democrats voted en masse against this in the House. They lost only one vote, Jared Golden in Maine. I've seen a lot of House members, and across an ideological range, interestingly enough, urging the Senate to filibuster this, saying, look, this is existential about whether we control the power of the purse or not. We cannot essentially sign off on this Doge unilateral arrogation of this power.
Yeah, look, I supported what the House did to vote against this bill universally, but that didn't cause a shutdown. It's different in the Senate. And I knew people were going to disagree with me, but I felt so strongly that the shutdown would be the greatest disaster we face with these arrogant autocrats that we had to avoid the shutdown and fight on many of the other things, every other issue that we have.
All right, Senator Chuck Schumer, who's the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, announcing he will be a yes for cloture tomorrow. I imagine you will have the 6 or so other votes you need to get that over the hump.
You said earlier you were a, quote, hell no on the Republican CR. Are you still a hell no?
Oh, absolutely. And here's what it comes down to. If you want to stop a bully, you don't hand over your lunch money. And if you want to stop a tyrant, you don't hand them more power. What we have seen in this extraordinary set of circumstances is a president who's taken down the watchdogs in terms of the inspector generals, fired the FBI agents who look over executive branch, who is trying to intimidate the press, and who is trying to intimidate Congress. And we have seen republics around the world fall because Congress becomes intimidated. Well, the Republicans on both sides are intimidated. The House Democrats don't have the power to stop on the House side, so the only power rests with us to use our 60-vote power to force a negotiation. I feel like the path we are on for tomorrow night, in which Democrats will provide votes, will not accomplish that negotiation. In fact, clearly it won't. Back in 2019, when we were facing a Republican president, Trump, we used this power. We forced a negotiation. And what we did then is even more true now. That's the path we should be on. We have to fight a tyrant now. It is never true that you let them accumulate more power and it will be easier later.
Senator Smith, you said you were a no on the Republican resolution. Are you still a no?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is a moment where the Republicans are helping Donald Trump and Elon Musk do a giant power grab on our government. Either way, they're hell-bent to shut down the government. And I think that it is essential in this moment that we stand up to it. Just as Jeff is saying, this is a moment where we have to say, no, we are not going to go along with this bully. Because if we go along with it now, it's going to come back again and again and again. And I think it's important that people understand that this so-called continuing resolution resolution is not a continuation of laws that Congress passed in the prior year, last year. It is a complete wholesale rewriting of those laws. It takes away research money for Alzheimer's and fetal alcohol syndrome. It would stop hundreds of projects in Minnesota that help us build child care centers in Moorhead and public safety projects in Rochester, Minnesota. And it gives Elon Musk and Donald Trump the power to basically decide, is this money that we want to reward our friends with, or are we going to punish our enemies by not spending that money?
And that was where I was going to ask you about, because do you trust President Trump and Elon Musk and Russell Vought to actually spend the money in the ways that even that CR says they should be spent?
Well, one thing about this CR, it does not have the type of table in it that says how different funds will be allocated. So let's take, for example, the Great American Outdoor Act. Normally, there would be a table that would lay out how it would be fairly distributed around the country to different projects. Those tables are not in this. This means what we are handing Trump is a slush fund that he can use to reward states he's happy with, red states, and to penalize states he's unhappy with, blue states. That type of situation absolutely feeds into his desire already to have a way to kind of turn the knife in members of Congress to work his will. Congress, under the separation of powers, has to be fierce in defending that separation and defending the checks and balances.
So, Senator Smith, then, what are you hearing from your colleagues ahead of tomorrow's vote? Because you have colleagues, Democratic colleagues, who are in a tough position. They are on the ballot next year. What are you hearing from them or others who might be thinking of actually voting for the CR tomorrow?
Well, what I'm hearing from my colleagues is, first of all, nobody wants the federal government to shut down. Everybody wants to hold the Republicans. And this is really about what the Republicans in the House and in the Senate are doing. This is their power grab. And people are furious about it. And everyone is trying to figure out what is the right thing to do to protect our country in this moment. Jeff and I believe, and I think many of our colleagues believe, that this is a moment where we really have to stand up. But at the end of the day, everyone is trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. And it's, we're faced with two terrible choices. And that's the reality that the Republicans have put on our feet. And, my view of it is, if they want me to vote for their plan, then they need to negotiate with me and my colleagues to make sure that the interests of the people that I represent are reflected in their bills. And they haven't done that.
They don't seem to be interested in doing that.
Absolutely not. No.
So if there is a government shutdown, Senator Berkley, how do Democrats get the message out that it is, in fact, a Republican shutdown?
Well, here's the way we do it. We take Patty Murray, Senator Murray from Washington, head of the Appropriations Committee, has laid out a 30-day plan in which we would have the government come open and we would negotiate. We'd either negotiate over the appropriation bills, which have all passed out of the Senate appropriation bills. That's the spending bills, 12 different bills, all passed out either unanimously or almost unanimously. Or if that path didn't avail itself, we could get a bipartisan continuing resolution that doesn't do these terrible things that the House version does. But to have that path work, we absolutely have to use the power we have in the Senate to deny the House Republican version. And here's the thing. We could go back to the floor every 2 hours and say, we're asking unanimous consent to spend an hour debating a return of opening the government for this 30 days for this purpose, and the Republicans would vote it down time after time. They would say no to the unanimous consent, and it would be so clear to the American people there's only one person and there's only one party to blame for a shutdown, and that's Trump, and that's the Republicans. And the American people are already inclined to think that because they understand the Republicans control the House, the Senate, the Oval Office. A recent poll said independents fully understand by 29% that it's the Republicans who would be responsible if there was a shutdown. And what we would see is Trump, last time on the 2019 shutdown, 35 days, he suffered politically. The point that I disagree with some of my colleagues who have said Trump wants the shutdown is what I have heard is that he was lobbying for the House bill and didn't want to shut down, knows how it hurt him last time, and knows that DOJ would be shut down under a shutdown.
Senator Smith, what do you hear? Let's switch gears and talk about tariffs and the impacts of tariffs, or even the uncertainty over tariffs. What are you hearing from your constituencies about the impact of all this on local economies in Minnesota? And then we'll talk about Oregon.
It's a huge deal. So, here's a guy who campaigned on delivering prosperity to Americans on day one. And what's happened? Costs are up. The tariffs have created massive chaos. People's retirement savings, as we had at the beginning of your show, are disappearing overnight. And what I'm hearing at home is just especially from farmers and producers, is the trauma of having no idea what to expect. And you can see that being reflected in the stock market as well, but you can see it reflected in the faces of farmers in Minnesota who are wondering where their markets are going to be, what's going to happen. And then when at the same time the president and DOJ are cutting the farm to school programs that create markets at home for American food products in schools, they are just feeling like there's nobody who has their back in the Trump administration.
Is that what you're hearing in Oregon, Senator?
We are hearing exactly the same thing. I mean, during the last Trump tariff battles, we had bans on our Christmas trees, on our wine, on our fruits. And in fact, right now, we're looking at the situation where with Europe, if we're banning their alcohol from coming to the U.S., my wine industry is very concerned about our wine. The best Pinot Noir on the planet, I might add, will be banned from going to Europe. No, it can affect us in all kinds of ways. There's an extremely high level of stress over this.
Senator Smith, let me get you on one thing before we have to go. Federal judges appear to be holding the line against Trump and Musk's dictator moves. Does it make you feel confident this can be stopped?
Well, I think it's going to be stopped by Americans saying enough already. We are not going to put up with this. And it's going to be stopped by those of us in Congress who fight. But what is happening in the lower courts does give me real hope. We had this judge today who said, this is a scam effort to defend the firings that you're doing. And I think that we're seeing some really good things coming out of the courts so far.
Aaron, let's talk about this trade war, reciprocal tariffs. We heard the president not so long ago saying they raise it 25, we raise it 25. That's fair. Now he's saying they raise it 25, we raise it 200. What's the administration thinking going forward here?
Well, Chris, President Trump is fully dug in on this issue of going to war over these tariffs. I should note that the president right now is in the Oval Office with the Secretary General of NATO. They're having a Q&A with reporters that are in the Oval Office recording what is happening right now, the beginning of their bilateral meeting. And the president said on tariffs, I'm not going to bend at all. He was asked specifically about the tariffs that are being placed on the Canadians, and he responded to that by saying, we don't need anything they have. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their energy. And so, again, it shows that the president is fully dug in on this idea of charging or matching, at least, the taxes that other countries, Canada, the European Union, are placing on American goods as well. We know that there was a meeting scheduled for today between the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, as well as the Finance Minister from Canada, the Premier of Ontario, coming to Washington. And we were told that they were really here to try to figure out an off-ramp, to try to figure out a way to bring down the temperature on this trade war, this tariff war that exists right now. At the same time, we heard the foreign minister in Canada yesterday say that the Canadians are also willing to keep going with this, to fight, to go on offense here. She is holding the G7 foreign ministers meeting where Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in attendance right now. And she indicated that throughout the day of meetings that they're having there in Canada, she intends to bring up the issue of tariffs with European countries in an effort to stand up together against the Americans in this moment. And so it seems as though, Chris, everybody is dug in on this issue. They were the Treasury Secretary seemed to indicate that President Trump simply wants other countries to bring down their tariffs and the United States would match suit. He also said that he would counsel other governments around the world that they are on the losing side of this argument economically if they want to go tit for tat on tariffs with the United States, Chris.
All right, thank you for that. I should let people know that we are indeed following through the pool notes what we're hearing inside the Oval Office. The president was asked, among other things, what about the impact on small business, to which he said they're going to be so much richer than they are right now, continuing what has been messaging from him, suggesting it's all going to be okay. But, Peter, let me play a little bit of what Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said this morning about the thinking with the president threatening European wine after the EU taxed American whiskey.
The president was totally annoyed that the Europeans did this. And so you're going to hear back from someone who emotionally cares about America. He cares about America, and he wants to take care of Americans. And why are Europeans picking on Kentucky bourbon
Secretary
or
Lutnick,
Harley-Davidson motorcycles?
Are you saying this is an emotional response?
Peter, you heard the interview asking if this is an emotional response. What did you hear there, and what does your reporting tell you about whether this trade war is being determined by a long-term economic vision or how the president feels that day?
Yeah, I mean, you heard the word annoyed. That's the word I heard there. It's all about his personal pique. It's not about an economic strategy. I mean, when Secretary Bessent says we're not going to change course, which course are we talking about? The course when we put them on, or the course when we take them off? The course when we pause them, the course when we escalate them? It's hard to tell. Businesses, foreign trading partners, they don't know what the course is because the president doesn't seem to stick to a course. He's been all over the map on this. And I think that's one of the things that people find so hard to understand. That's why you see so much volatility in the market. Now, you know, maybe they're right that over the short term, it will make some disruption, and long term, it'll create better policy, and nobody will remember this a month from now or 6 months from now or a year from now. That's possible. But we've heard that before. The last president I heard say, hey, don't worry about short-term pain. It'll work out in the long run was President Joe Biden when he said, yeah, okay, inflation's high right now, but don't worry, it'll come back down. It did come back down, but people still remember the inflation. They're still paying higher prices that resulted from that inflation. So if they don't manage to get to wherever it is that they're trying to go, and even maybe to explain where they're trying to go, because they haven't really done that very well, then it poses a risk. If they get someplace and then call this off and find a better policy that makes a difference, sure. But right now, nobody has described exactly what that would look like.
Yeah, and Julia, you heard Secretary Bessent saying exactly what we've been hearing from President Trump. Look past the day-to-day market drops, focus on the long-term vision. But are business leaders buying that argument from the administration? And by the way, are small business owners who we've been interviewing who are saying, please stop the tariffs, going to buy the fact that, again, I'll quote him, they're going to be so much richer than they are right now?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of issues for people who are operating businesses right now in this environment. One are the policies themselves. As Peter noted, it's not really clear what the strategy or the end goal is to these trade wars. When he ran on tariffs, it was mostly focused on China, not focused on our biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. Throwing fentanyl into the mix as some kind of motivating issue is confusing. We don't know where we're going, and uncertainty is terrible for business. It's very hard to make capital spending plans and hiring plans when you just don't know what the future looks like. And the second is that, tariffs and trade wars are just bad for growth. They're expensive. They raise costs. They throw sand into the gears of your supply chains. So, what we're seeing in markets is, investors are starting to mark down their growth expectations. They had already marked up their inflation expectations a bit, bracing themselves for a trade war. But tariffs can be managed if you know exactly what they are. They're put in place, and then you can navigate around those realities. We just don't know where we're going, and that leaves businesses sort of like deer in the headlights, wondering what comes next.
Let me ask you a big picture question, because we looked at your company's website. It says your work is based on the principle that the U.S. economy is inextricably linked to the global economy. Do you believe the goal of this trade war is to sever that link?
It does appear, and certainly that has been President Trump's philosophy, is more nativist. It looks inward. These are almost sort of what we call import substitution policies, bring things back. But that is really not the reality of the global economy, which is inextricably linked, both on the production of services and goods. There is no real reality to deglobalization. Now, you can address strategic issues like we did with chips or medical supplies. You can sort of identify that you want sort of domestic capacity in key areas. And, that could be a reasonable goal. But just sort of have a blanket policy that we're going to put up tariffs on everything and try to reshore manufacturing. I mean, one of the overlooked things that we think is very important is that the U.S. operates a major services surplus. We export education services, we export tourism, we export research and professional consulting services and finance. These are areas that are going to suffer from these policies. So, it's a real shock to the system and to try to reorient the U.S. economy away from these global linkages very quickly. And again, without a clear strategy of where we're going or what we're trying to do.
Peter, David Sanger wrote a piece in your paper today that says this, quote, President Trump's simultaneous trade wars with Canada, Mexico, China, and the European Union amount to a huge economic and political gamble that Americans will endure months or years of economic pain in return for the distant hope of reindustrializing the American heartland. I mean, we've heard about some rumblings within his inner circle, people concerned about what this might mean. Obviously, the president doesn't have to worry about re-election. And let's be honest about it. Every time, pretty much, doom and gloom has been mentioned when he does something incredibly unconventional, he comes out on the other side. But I'm wondering what you're hearing. Is there nervousness about the level of gamble?
Yeah, I think so. Look, this is a president who has measured his success in the past on the daily gyrations of the stock market. Time and time again in his first term, he would say that stock market increases were proof of his economic genius. Well, now, of course, that they're going down, he's saying, well, don't pay attention to that. I don't look at that. I mean, if you invested money on the day he took office, you've lost money. Americans have lost money under Donald Trump at this point. It's early. Doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Markets tend to go up and they tend to go down, and it's very likely that they'll go back up again. But it's a remarkable thing for a president who has been so market focused to take the chance that he's taking now. And the question is whether or not ultimately, long term, businesses agree with his strategy if they can discern what it is and, get back into a growth phase. But the idea, as we were just talking about, that we might be heading toward a recession, I would think that that's what the people at the White House think is the most dangerous political possibility for them.
We may end up having to go to the White House just to see what's going on because they're going to play back, Julia, the pool questions that were given to the president and the NATO Secretary General. But let me ask you this, kind of a expectation setting or reality check. One of the things that he was asked about just now was about tariffs on aluminum and steel. And he says he's not going to bend at all. He said, we've been being ripped off. It's a phrase he uses over and over and over again when it comes to his reasons for tariffs, that the United States has been ripped off. What is the general, it's maybe a good line for, the American public. Who wants to get ripped off? Nobody. But what's the reality?
Look, the reality of the U.S. economy is that the U.S. has experienced by far the strongest recovery in the world from the pandemic by every metric. And it's been growth, it's been productivity growth. We've seen inflation cool down pretty substantially without a rise in unemployment. We've really been outperforming every other economy. So this notion that somehow we're getting the short end of the stick is definitely not the global perception of the U.S. economy and not really the reality that the macro statistics paint.